At the end of the 1988 Summer Olympics in Seoul, South Korea, Karch Kiraly and his American teammates had just finished off the Soviet Union in 4 games to capture the men's volleyball gold medal. The greatest player in the world always made the biggest plays, often hearing his father Laszlo's voice in his head, "Rise and think, Karch, rise and think." It was the second time Karch had won gold, but this one over the Soviets was particularly sweet. Karch, you see, was an American because Laszlo had left Hungary after taking part in the 1956 Hungarian Revolution against the Soviets. What goes around comes around. I'm a Venice, California-born, Los Angeles-based sports fan, one that has played, coached, announced, and promoted sports my whole life. My love affair with sports started in my own backyard and has led me to this podcast. Thanks to the support of the Amateur Athletic Union in East Bay, I'm excited to bring you Sports Stories with Denny Lennon. Hello, sports historians. Welcome to the audio-video podcast, episode number 39 of Sports Stories with Denny Lennon. It's the first of our 5-part series on the greatest volleyball player of all time, the 3-time Olympic gold medal winner, and the current head coach of the USA women's national team. Yep, you heard that right. Impressive, huh? There's so much more. Karch has so much success. In fact, we have decided to call this series a Kiraly July. And thank God this particular July has 5 Thursdays in it. By the way, that's yet another record that Karch has set. He becomes the first Sports Stories guest to have 5 episodes in a series. The man is a machine. That Hungarian Revolution in 1956 was the backdrop for one of the most famous Olympic Games ever played, Hungary versus the Soviet Union in water polo. At those Melbourne Summer Games, blood in the water they called it, well worth a search. Karch addresses his dad's role in that student uprising, which is an incredible story, along with so much more in this whole series. But before we go much further, we need to say hello to the producer for the top video podcast in the CENTINELA ADOBE corridor, the director of the SSDL 5 slate of shows on YouTube, and the winner of the 2018 AAU President's National Leadership Award for Outstanding Service, my quarantine partner for life, Christine Jimbo.
Hi, everybody. I feel like my titles list gets longer each time, too.
Yeah, they do.
Okay, just making sure that's...
for those.
I'm just looking for the pay raise that goes along with it.
I think it's, yeah, we'll double your pay.
No, thank you. I'll look for it in my next paycheck. Okay, so I'm here to remind you to get to our social media sites. You can get to all of our social media by hitting the website at sportstoriespodcast.com. And an easy search is Sports Stories with Denny Lennon. That's Denny like the restaurant, Lennon like the Beatle. And I also want to tell you that we are showing our podcasts on a new platform, the High School Narrative. And you can get there by the hsnarrative.com. And so we're distributing some of our content in their platforms, and we think they're a really kind of fun partner that's going to do some good.
No doubt. Also want to encourage you to visit our East Bay store. We got some gear there. We'll be loading up more gear as time goes by.
And I encourage you, if you're not a huge fan of the muscle tees, email us at info@sportstoriespodcast.com and tell us what kind of clothes you want to see on there.
We put that on. That's the Box Cobbler series.
Right. Yep. Hats, shoes, whatever you think you want to see on that site, send us an email. We'll get that up there.
Please follow me on Twitter at SportsStoriesDL. Besides plenty of top-level tweets, my Twitter account is where the voting will take place for the matchups of the first-ever East Bay 74-28 shootout. Well, if you don't know what that is, you can catch up on my Twitter, or you can read my blog, or any of our social media accounts. We'll be announcing that projected start of July 6th on that one. It's going to be good. This interview was quite special for me. I certainly had known Karch, who's 4 years older than me, not only because I was a volleyball and Olympic Games fan, but I had teamed with Karch about 15 years ago. Yeah, I teamed with him. It wasn't in volleyball. It was in a promotional tour. We traveled around and promoted the sport of beach volleyball. I had a first-hand look at how the greatest of all time works, and it was impressive to say the least. It was also mind-boggling to watch how the rest of the volleyball world reacted to him. I want to make sure I note here what a nice man Karch is, always thoughtful and kind to those who came into contact with him. In case I haven't supported the idea that Karch is the greatest volleyball player of all time, let's consider just a couple of the highlights. He was a CIF high school volleyball champ while playing in California in high school at Santa Barbara High School. He was a 4-time All-American and a 3-time NCAA champ at UCLA. His teams went 124-5. All right, he's a 3-time Olympic volleyball gold medal winner, 2 indoor, 1 on the beach, only player to win gold at both. He was named the FIVB's best player of the 20th century. Okay, that's pretty definitive. FIVB is the sanctioning body of all of volleyball throughout the world. 6-time AVP most valuable player. The AVP is the Pro Domestic Tour of Beach Volleyball. He has a record 148 wins. That means he won the tournament. 148 wins over 28 seasons. He played until he was in his mid-40s and was still dominating. I'm leaving out so much, but it is certainly safe to say he transcended his sport the way Jordan and Tiger transcended theirs. In this first installment, we hear about Laszlo in Hungary and his parents moving to Santa Barbara. We hear about Karch in his youth. We also hear about his time at Santa Barbara High School playing for the one and only Rick Olmsted. So now it's time for part 1 of our 5-part Karch Kiraly. From the USA Volleyball National Team Center in Anaheim, California, here's our Sports Stories interview with the greatest volleyball player ever, Karch Kiraly. Please note this interview was recorded on January 17th, 2020. You know, I'm not sure when we first kind of like bumped in or got to know one another, but something I found kind of fun. Recently, I was duping over a lot of old videos. And do you remember how we used to run that backyard volleyball tournament in Venice? We used to run in a series of backyards.
Yes, I do remember that.
Yep, and we made a big deal out of it, of course, being LENNON's. So we would do a day before inside the VBC, and I did this fake phone call, a la Bob Newhart style, pretending that you were calling in, and I said, Karch, who? I'm sorry, but the tournament's full. Oh, yeah.
I like that. Fantastic.
Sorry, we don't have room for you, Karch. So I was going to do this in kind of like a chronological order.
Okay.
If you're good with that. And one of the things I found interesting that I think...
And what's the basic theme
we're just going to tell
your series here?
The basic theme is we're telling unique and uplifting sports stories.
Okay.
And then putting some historical and social context to it.
Okay, great.
Yeah, and so that's what we've been doing with our guests, and we're looking forward to doing that.
Hopefully I can add to that a little.
We're going to try to have a Karch Kiraly.
All right. Whoa.
Yeah.
I think good month this year.
I think the story starts around, is the way I was looking at it, you know, in the 56, in the Hungarian national revolt. Like your father was involved in that, huh?
Yeah. He was 21 years old at the time. He was a college student and living in Budapest, which is the capital of Hungary. And it was a really exciting time for Hungarians because for many years they had, especially after World War II, they had essentially been a puppet country, a puppet government of the Soviet Union. And they had never had their own elections, gotten to pick their own legislators and representatives and representative government. So as he was one of tens of thousands of students who started a peaceful protest to demand that. And the Soviet Union held back. And the world was watching this unfold. And I'm getting goosebumps thinking about it all over here. It was a really exciting time for Hungarians. For about a 10-day, 2-week period, they thought they were going to go from a total dictatorship controlled by another country to taking back ownership of their own country. Right. And so he would walk through the neighborhood every day and when you live in a totalitarian state, even if it's controlled by another country, everybody keeps an eye. The government and its agents keep an eye on everybody. So his block, as every block did, had basically a spy who would report the goings and comings of anybody in the neighborhood. So he would walk every day to these peaceful protests. Upward of 100,000 students and people would come out to these. And every day he would look up because he knew which apartment this person lived in, and he could see this agent keeping an eye on people but looking through the slit in the curtain, because the agent at this point doesn't know if he's going to be thrown out. The existing puppet regime is now in danger of losing their power, maybe getting removed from the country, or if the protests turn violent, it could be worse. And so he could, my dad could see his goings and comings being tracked every day. At some point, about 2 weeks in, this was late October, early November of 1956, the Soviets decided, we've had enough of this. We're sending in our tanks and we're going to crush this thing. And that's when he knew he had to leave, because his choices were stay, be tortured and executed, or leave, because he knew he'd been tracked. And he was clearly and proudly joining these peaceful protests, these student protests. So he had to escape and say goodbye to his family, his younger sister. Run at nighttime. I think one time he told me about he was a lot of little cafes, or more like trattorias, like little family restaurants, would have the restaurant in the downstairs and their living quarters upstairs. And of course Hungarians looked out for each other, so he's running toward the border. At times he would be hiding up above and look through the floorboards and see military people coming through looking for anybody who was on the run.
My goodness. But
he eventually made it through, had to run through minefields, and he did have a rifle. A lot of the students, while it was peaceful, they were afraid that they were going to get attacked, so they carried arms sometimes. So he made it to the Austrian border, turned in his weapon, and eventually ended up in this country. Got a scholarship from the Lutheran Church. I think it was like a $1,000 to go to Wayne State University in Detroit. Eventually transferred to University of Michigan. Got his undergrad degree there, his master's in civil engineering, met my mom, most importantly of all, and then got eventually his medical credentials.
Wow, that's a lot for a 21, and then
to leave your family behind.
Leave all that behind.
And part of it was, this is how brutal the regime was, they would let his mom come to visit us in the 60s, but his dad was still valuable to them as a worker, so they didn't let him come visit until he was retired.
Unbelievable.
So that was the first time he got to see his dad. Was, I don't know what, probably 15, 17 years later.
Unreal. I find it interesting, the intersection of athletics, and in particular the Olympics, and history, because what was only a couple months after that in Melbourne was when the water polo, Hungary and Russia had that battle in the pool.
Yeah.
And they had to cancel the game, I think, after the crowd kind of turned against the Soviet Union's team. You
bring it up and I'm getting more goosebumps. There's a great movie, and I'm forgetting what it is. It's a documentary. It's something about fury. I've got to look it up. I might remember it as we're talking. But anyway, Freedom's Fury.
Freedom's Fury.
So I would recommend it to people. At the same time this was going on, and my dad was involved in, as tens of thousands of mostly college students were also involved in these protests. The Hungarian water polo team had to go in hiding in the hills because they didn't know what was going to happen here.
Wow.
And the backstory there is the Hungarian water polo team was the best in the world.
Yeah.
Hungarians are really good at some water sports, especially the the swim medleys. They have a lot of people who swim all 4 strokes really well. They're just a water-loving people, great rivers and all of that there.
They were the defending gold medal champs, I think, in
they
water
were
polo.
the best in the world. So, but unfortunately, the Soviet Union called the shots in Hungary, and they said they forced the Hungarian water polo team, the best team in the world, to open their practice and everything about their program to the Russian team, to the Soviet Union team, and just said, we don't care if you don't like it. We are sending our team, and they get to watch everything you do, and then they would copy it and do it every afternoon. So clearly, the Hungarians weren't too happy with this, being forced to teach their oppressors to be great at water polo. So then they get to Australia, and there's so much commotion and chaos in Hungary. The Hungarian team didn't know what was going to result. Some of them decided when they got to Australia that they would never go back because they were afraid of facing the same thing that my dad
and
lots
Australia
of
had
people
some
would face.
expats there, I think.
Yes. And so they ended up, some people decided never to come back, but they ended up having an epic water polo battle, and there's a famous shot. You could find it on by doing a quick search of the Hungarian water polo player coming out of the water.
Took a shot.
And blood just pouring down his face. The pool turned pink because the Hungarians were like, there is no way. These guys and their government, not these guys, their government forced us to teach them everything we know. We are not going to let them.
Fans came down heavy on the Russians there.
And so they ended up winning, which was awesome. But it was a period of time where it's phenomenal that they even won, because while they were in hiding in the hills, they didn't have a pool. They're just sitting in a hotel trying to work out with no pool and none of their normal equipment as they went into hiding. So they went for weeks without proper training and still figured out a way to win. I think it was in late November, early December of that Olympic year. But it was the most epic water polo battle in history because of the governments and the politics behind it.
No doubt about it.
We interrupt this podcast to bring you a commercial.
Sports Stories with Denny Lennon aims to bring its subscribers interesting, unique, and uplifting stories. You can find us at sportstoriespodcast.com. We drop audio, video podcasts every Thursday and go live at 5 on YouTube 4 nights a week. That's Sports Stories with Denny Lennon.
And now back to our interview.
So your father obviously is influenced by all of that, and so you're born, I think, in 1960 or so, Michigan, but you come out west, and then about 6 years old is when he starts to play a little volleyball with you, because he was a player on his junior national team.
Yep, he was a good player in Hungary, and the sport at that time had a reasonable following in Hungary, and so he played on the junior national team, and when he came to this country, he kept playing even though there weren't tons of places to play in Michigan, but he kept it going. He was a member of the Ann Arbor YMCA team, like the adult team that would go to USA Volleyball Adult Nationals, and they would do all right there, and they would play against club teams from some of the universities like Michigan State, and so part of our time together was he worked really hard in medical school. He would spend just the whole week he'd be buried with things, but he kept his volleyball going. So early in Saturday mornings, maybe 4 a.m., something like that, he and I would jump in the car, really cold winters in Michigan, and drive all over the state to Saginaw and Flint and Kalamazoo and just go to these Saturday tournaments. And I would follow him around and be with his team, just kind of tag along. A lot of times they were playing, so I might bump the ball against the wall to myself, or a lot of those old gyms have the indoor tracks that run around the upper level. They're really cool, with the bank at the curves. And so I would just goof around there, and his teammates and he would play a little pepper with me. And then eventually, when he finished medical school, he had what you do, even still, out of med school, you do your year of internship, your first year beyond, and you start specializing in what form of medicine you're going to end up being a doctor at. So he and my mom stumbled upon Santa Barbara, fell in love with it, made a beeline to the just looked it up in the phone book. Where's the nearest hospital? I'm going to apply here to see if I can do an internship. And he applied.
And that's what brought him out.
And yeah, they were just kind of driving through town, exploring California. And they fell in love with Santa Barbara and just applied, got it. And so for that 1 year, he got his first consistent taste of beach volleyball and fell in love. Well, they fell in love with Santa Barbara.
Sure.
We all did. I was only 6. It's easy for me to fall in love with
Being able to
the
go to the
beach and all of that
Yeah.
stuff. So that was my 2nd grade year. And so he would go down to East Beach every weekend, even though he was working 80, 90, 100-hour weeks as an intern. But again, that was our family time together, was on the weekends. And we'd bump it back and forth. Eventually spent some more time back there because we went back to Michigan for residency, but spent some more time there. First time I ever played on a court was when I was 9 against my dad. He had a lot of good friends that he knew there, and picked the best player who was willing to play with us, and put that best player with me to help me out, because it was this is at a time when there are no small courts, low nets or anything like that. So just playing on an adult court. 9 years old, that's the first time I remember playing. I played with a guy who was really well known in East Beach circles. He was the unofficial, quote, mayor of East Beach, Bill Conway. His name was Seaway, and he was a great AA player. And so got to play with them. Eventually, my dad and I played in our first tournament at 11 years old at Corona Del Mar, and then kept going from there. But some great times. So he was my first teammate, my first partner for 4 or 5 years of actual competition in volleyball.
There's some level of osmosis, I think, that takes place too. I just viewed it in different sports, but I think when you're really young like that and you hang around and you get modeled in front of you, not only good technique, but good players, which you're automatically drawn to, but just how people love the sport.
Yeah.
There's something about that, I think, when you're really young, that'll cement in you.
There was no money in volleyball. There was Olympic indoor volleyball, but there was no beach volleyball in the Olympics yet. So there was really nothing, no extrinsic reward to play for. So you're right. Everybody who was playing those weekend tournaments, and in those days it was all day Saturday and all day Sunday, and people couldn't get enough of volleyball.
Couldn't get enough. Go
to Playa del Rey, where Pete Field and Gene Popko would run their tournaments, and it'd be like 128 or more teams. Wow. And but everybody was in it just to get better, to try to win the next game, to get a rating, maybe get your B rating, and eventually work up
the ladder
to try to get your AAA rating. But you're right. I think one of the things that turned out to be a real advantage for me, even though I didn't know it at the time, was there was no club volleyball, no junior volleyball. That turned out to be great, because when I was 12, nobody, and we were playing in tournaments, we were only playing grown men, and no grown man that I know of wants to lose to a 12-year-old kid. So they were not holding back against me. And so, A, they were tough on me, because there's no way they want to lose to a 12-year-old kid. Their friends are going to heckle them for the next year.
That's right.
B, when you see adults playing, you see them doing it close to the way it should be done, as opposed to other 12-year-olds who are just learning and flailing around. And so I got to see a lot of what it should look like, which helped me. They were models for me, and also helped me just learn to anticipate and read the game, because I got a lot more chances at seeing what it would look like all through my career. But the average 12-year-old doesn't get to see that now, because she or he, they're playing against their own age group, and everybody's just trying to figure things out, so they don't get as many chances to see what it should look like and to learn how to anticipate what comes from somebody who plays the way it should look like.
So by the time you get to Santa Barbara High School, you're you've developed your skills, as has your best buddy John Hanley.
Yeah.
Right, and somehow you get Rick Olmsted over there to take over the program.
Yeah.
Yep. And Rick said something to the effect of coaching Karch and John. He threw John in there, of course, and he said was both the best and the worst thing that could have happened to me. It was the best because these guys were so good and they worked so hard, and we had great success. It was the worst because nobody worked like they did once they left, and it drove me out of my mind.
I love Coach Rick. We loved having him as our high school coach there at Santa Barbara High School. In those days, I can't even remember now. Santa Barbara, I should know this, but I don't. In those days, it was 3 years of high school and 3 years of middle school. So we played as 10th, 11th, and 12th graders, and his intensity was phenomenal. Coach Rick. His hunger to see us do as well as we could possibly do, but probably most of all, he instilled in us just a crazy work ethic. Not that we didn't already know how to work hard, but he made demands of us, and we fulfilled those demands, and it just we learned we were capable of doing more than we thought. So, for example, at that time, there was no club volleyball. As I said before, and so in the fall he gave us these workouts to do, and we would do them in the buddy system so that we could hold each other accountable, make sure everybody was doing it. And it was just a little, they're only now renovating. I was back a few months ago and saw it, but they had a tiny little football stadium with 10, it was like cement block steps.
Yeah, I know 'em.
So you could sit on these rows, but you could also do workouts on them because they were higher than the average step. They were like 2.5 steps high.
Yeah.
And so our workout, our average workout in those fall voluntary workouts was to do 100 stadiums, which is 1,000 jumps. Wow. So we would run 20, hop 20 with 2 feet, hop 20 with the left, hop 20 with the right, and then finally hop up 2, down 1 with 2. And so 100 stadiums, 1,000 jumps of various sorts, and that would be an example of what we would do. Or he would say, all right, now you guys are running. He figured out it was about a little over a mile run. We would run from campus and have to go down on Milpas, which is one of the main ways to get into Santa Barbara. When you get in, you get in town, you take the Milpas exit, and you go north, and you're taking it towards Santa Barbara High. And so he would have us run down and touch the McDonald's and come back. But sometimes, if we were playing a weaker opponent, we would be doing that at a time when the opponent would have been driving up Milpas. So we were under orders not to drive along Milpas. We had to pop out and just touch McDonald's and then go on the back streets because we were also not in the business of humiliating our opponents.
Which Rick is
but
honorable
we had
guy.
Huge challenges there in terms of what he asked of us, demanded of us physically, and that was the number one lesson that I always carried on from Rick, and loved. Just really blessed to have a great coach in Rick Olmsted, and also other great coaches like Al Skates at UCLA, Doug Beal and Bill Neville and Marv Dunphy with USA. And Rick was the first non-family coach because my dad was my teammate and also my coach early.
Sports Stories with Denny Lennon is supported by the AAU. Find a local event and join at aausports.org. And remember, you can catch your favorite amateur sports live stream, replays, and highlights at ballertv.com. Sports Stories, along with East Bay, supports the Heroes Movement, a nonprofit that bridges the gap from mental or physical therapy to getting strong again through strength and conditioning workouts. This free service is available for any veteran of the United States Armed Forces. Visit heroesmovementusa.org for more information. Sports Stories, along with thousands of people across the country, also supports the My Stuff Bags Foundation, a nonprofit that provides traumatized children with new belongings and new hope. Learn more at mystuffbags.org. Sports Stories with Denny Lennon is a production of Sports Stories, Inc. and is available on Apple Podcasts and YouTube or wherever you listen and watch. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and give us a review. It really helps spread the word. You can find all our social media links, archives, and other info on our website at sportsstoriespodcast.com. Special thanks to the John R. Wooden Course and Wooden's Wisdom. Original music for Sports Stories is courtesy of Lennon Music Productions. Original images by Sienna Lennon Photography. Sports Stories is produced by Christine Jimbo and Marley Rice. Sports Stories is edited by Bob McCall. Additional staff include Ray Castro, Teresa Dolan, Jake Downey, Carlos Haro, and Buck Magic Lennon.
Mama just watched a show. It's called Sports Stories with Denny. Mama, life's been good for me, 'cause you know I'm just a big baby. Sports Stories, whoa, whoa. Sports Stories with Denny Lennon at 5 o'clock. Oh, wait, that's my feeding time.
Check it out, Buck.